Okay, hi there. This is the week 2 lecture, the narrated lecture for the PowerPoint for week 2 for OT 300. Okay, this is part 1 of the lecture, the first video. So these are the lecture questions that I was talking about. So we have 7 lecture questions here. Questions 1 through 6, there'll be 1 or 2, 2 to 3 probably, of these questions on next week's quiz. So on the 9-7 quiz, on the Monday when you come in 9-7 in the lab, the first thing you're going to do is a quiz, and it's going to be on one of these 6 questions. We will answer these questions in this lab today, in this lecture today. Question 7, the motions and anatomy of the scalpel, that's going to be on the anatomy portion of the following week, 9-14 quiz. So don't worry about question 7 for the 9-7 quiz. Just focus on 1 through 6. Okay, let's get right into them. Kinesiology, that's one of your questions, one of your lecture questions. And here's the definition, here's the answer in red right here. Here's kinesiology. It's the study of movement, combines anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics. So here's an example. So you're lifting up your shoulder, you're flexing your shoulder. The prime mover flex for that motion is your deltoid, your anterior deltoid. That's the anatomy. What is it doing physiologically? It's contracting. You know, remember from your A&P classes, the muscle is shortening and that pulls up on the bone, lifts it right up, it flexes it. Lifts it kind of up in the air. If you think about reaching into a cupboard to get a cup or a bowl or something. In the morning when you get your cereal, reach into the cupboard to get that bowl, you're flexing your shoulder, you're contracting that muscle, and you're using your deltoid. Biomechanics is the flexing of the shoulder. Kinetic chain. This idea of the kinetic chain is that all movement is kind of linked together. This is a big rehab concept to kind of get over and over again in that program, and then when you're practicing. All movements is these kinetic chains of muscles and nerves and joints. And if there's an issue in some point along the chain, there's a missing link or a link that's not working as well as it should in that chain, that's what you need to kind of analyze, see what the problem is, and try to fix it through an exercise or an activity. Here's a definition for kinetic chain. A movement pattern's predictable sequence is called a kinetic chain. So that is your definition for a kinetic chain. Like I said, it's this kind of linked muscles and nerves, and something that's missing, you'll lose your power, your coordination. You can't do what you want to be able to do. Say you're trying to, looks like let's say he's got a sheet and he's trying to make the bed and he's fluffing out the sheet. He can't do it because there's something missing. His deltoid muscle is too weak or whatever. Then as a therapist you say, oh, it's the deltoid is the issue, we need to rehab that deltoid so he can make his bed again. We kind of did this when we did the activity when you were doing sit to stand and there was a missing link, whatever it was, being able to get up from a chair. As a therapist, you have to find that out and kind of use this idea of kinetic chains to see where the missing part is. Okay, planes of movement. This is a review, I think, for most of you. Midline, medial towards the middle, lateral towards the outside, proximal closer towards the middle of the body, distal further away, so proximal is closer, distal is further away, and these different planes of the body. Body orientation, superior, the top, inferior, below, craniocaudal, the head and the tail. This is a big one. Posterior and anterior. We're using this a lot in your different classes. Posterior is the back, anterior is the front. Ranges, types of motion. Ranges of motion, using this terminology a lot in this class and your career as an OT. These different terms, need to know them, become like you know them like the back of your hand. Active range of motion, sometimes abbreviated AROM. This is like your normal movement. We talked about reaching into the cupboard to grab that bowl for cereal in the morning. You can do it normally When you're able-bodied, you don't need any help. I just reach my shoulder and I grab the bowl. Active assistive range of motion. You have some kind of weakness. Say it's weakness in that deltoid muscle. You can't get all the way up to get the bowl. So the therapist will work with you. You'll do part of it, and the therapist will do part of it. You kind of do it together. The therapist helps. The therapist helps. It's active assistive range of motion. Passive range of motion. This is when you can't lift your arm up at all. You see the bowl in the cupboard and you tell your arm to move and it just does not move. It's injured, it's been paralyzed, whatever it is, you cannot move it at all. The therapist is moving it for you. They're lifting it up into that, to get that bowl. They're doing all of the work. So passive range of motion, the therapist does it all. Here's some examples of range of motion. This dancer, she's young, athletic, she has great range of motion, maybe even excessive range of motion. The opposite, a lot of our clients, as you get older, you're losing range of motion as the joints kind of lose their elasticity. She's in this chair for long periods during the day, she's going to lose even more range of motion. So like her hips and knees, probably even her shoulders and everything, it's just going to be limited range of motion. There's ankle range of motion, dorsine plantar flexion of the ankle. Different degrees of mobility within the joints. Hypermobility, you have excessive joint mobility. When we get into the lab, we'll start measuring our range of motion, and it's like a quote-unquote normal, somebody, a normal person has range of motion, and a lot of you probably going to have beyond that. You're probably going to have excessive range of motion. If you're younger, a lot of females have hypermobile joints. Their fingers, their shoulders, whatever, really are excessive range of motion. And you'll see that on yourself and your partner. Well, you really have a hypermobile joint. It's really excessive range of motion. Or it could be the opposite. You may have hypomobility, HYPO mobility. With that, you have less than normal range of motion. You have restricted range of motion. Some of you may have fractured your wrist when you were young in sports or something. Maybe your wrist did not come all the way back. It probably is pretty functional, but if you checked out its range of motion, the different planes compared to your wrist you didn't fracture, and maybe a little bit off. You have some excuse me, I think I got that backwards. Hypomobility. So that you have lack of range of motion with the hypo, HYPO. You don't have full range of motion. Hyper, HYPER, you have excessive range of motion. Okay, this is the end of part 1.